In the quiet, windswept plains of rural Nebraska, a wealthy widower named William Carter was driving home from a routine business trip when something unimaginable caught his eye: a group of 3 little girls, barefoot and shivering by the side of the road. They were thin, pale, and clearly terrified. But what truly unsettled him was the small doll one of them held tightly in her arms. Pinned to it was a note that read, "Please help Grandma Margaret. They'll come back to kill us." What started as an act of kindness quickly became a journey into something far darker. As William tried to help, he uncovered a story filled with fear, desperation, and a haunting silence no child should ever carry. But he had no idea this moment would change his life forever. It was supposed to be just another ordinary evening. William Carter, a well-known businessman in his mid-40s, was driving along the quiet stretch of Highway 82 after a long day of negotiations. His tie was loosened, the radio played soft jazz, and the orange hues of the sunset melted into the Nebraska plains. He felt tired, but content. Another deal closed, another promise kept. As he turned a bend in the road, something caught his eye. 3 tiny figures walking along the shoulder, their outlines flickering in the dying light. At first, he thought it might be a trick of the eye, perhaps teenagers heading home, but as he drew closer, his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. These were children. He pulled to the side, gravel crunching under the tires. He stepped out of his car, the cold air biting at his skin, and slowly walked toward them. His heart began to race, not from fear, but from a deep, unsettling instinct that something was terribly wrong. The children stood frozen. The oldest, perhaps 7 or 8, stepped in front of the others as if trying to shield them. Her thin sweater fluttered in the wind, and her bare feet were red from the cold. Her eyes, wide, unblinking, locked with William's. They were not just scared. They were desperate. "I'm not going to hurt you," William said gently, raising his hands slightly. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The middle child clutched a dirty stuffed bunny, her fingers so tight around it they had turned white. The youngest one shivered silently, her lips bluish from the chill. Then William noticed the doll. It wasn't just a toy, it had something pinned to it. He crouched down slowly, careful not to startle them, and extended his hand. "May I see that?" he asked softly. After a moment's hesitation, the girl extended the doll with trembling fingers. William took the note pinned to its chest and unfolded it. 5 words. Scrawled in hurried, uneven handwriting. "Please help Grandma Margaret. Hurry." His chest tightened. His eyes shot back to the girls, now huddled together, shaking. Something inside him shifted. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't something he could drive away from. These children had run for a reason. And someone, somewhere, was running out of time. William's hands gripped the steering wheel with a vice-like tension, his knuckles turning white against the dark leather. The car hummed steadily along the gravel road, but the silence inside was suffocating, hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. He tried to focus on the road ahead, but his mind kept drifting back to the children in the back seat, Lily, the oldest, and her 2 younger siblings, their faces pale with exhaustion and fear. The youngest girl, no older than 4, curled up on her sister's lap, her small body shaking as she pressed her cheek against the window, staring out at the empty fields that stretched into the distance. Her lips quivered, but she didn't speak. William's heart ached at the sight. He couldn't fathom the horrors they had endured. He stole a glance at Lily through the rearview mirror. Her face was a mask of quiet strength, but her eyes betrayed the deep-rooted fear that she was trying so hard to suppress. Her grip on her sister's hand tightened as if trying to hold on to something, anything, that could give her some sense of safety. He exhaled softly, his breath a cloud in the cool air. "Lily," he said gently, keeping his voice steady. "Where are your parents?" Lily's head dipped, her gaze shifting to the floor as though the question had weighed too heavily on her. Her voice was barely a whisper when she answered. They're gone. It's just us now. We live with Grandma." William's pulse quickened, his eyes flickering back to the road, but he didn't dare say anything more just yet. The answer was too cryptic, too unsettling. He needed more. Lily continued in a hollow voice, as though recounting the words from someone else's life. "Grandma got sick. But Mr. Green, he said we couldn't call anyone." The mention of Harold Green sent a chill down William's spine. Harold had been a fixture in the town, someone everyone knew, or at least thought they knew. A quiet, reclusive man who kept to himself. William had heard rumors, of course. Strange things about him, things that didn't add up, but no one had ever connected him to anything sinister. At least, not until now. "What do you mean, couldn't call anyone?" William pressed, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel his own fear creeping up on him now, trying to choke out his calm exterior. Lily's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and for a brief moment, William could see the vulnerability she had been hiding. Her lower lip trembled, and she clenched her fists tightly in her lap, as though trying to steady herself. He locked the doors. He took Grandma's phone. He said if anyone found out we were here, they'd take us away. He told us to stay quiet. The words struck William like a blow to the gut. His thoughts spun, his mind racing to make sense of what he was hearing. What kind of man locks children away like that? And why? His hands tightened on the steering wheel, and he glanced at the rearview mirror again, catching sight of the youngest girl's fearful face. She was staring out the window, her wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. William knew that the danger these children had been living in was far greater than he had initially thought. He swallowed hard, trying to push back the rising panic. "Stay in the car," he said, his voice firm yet soft, trying to reassure them. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me, okay?" The children nodded, their faces pale and resigned, as if they had learned long ago to trust only each other. William stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at his skin, and felt the weight of the silence pressing in on him. He knew this was more than a routine call, more than just a case of runaway children. Something was wrong here. Deeply wrong. As he walked toward the Green property, the air grew heavier, and the sense of unease in his chest grew with every step. The farmhouse loomed ahead, dark and still. No lights. No movement. Not even a flicker in the windows. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath. He reached the front porch, his boots crunching on the gravel, and knocked on the door. His hand hovered over the brass knocker for a moment before he struck it against the wood with a firm, deliberate sound. "Mr. Green?" "It's William Carter." "Are you home?" he called out, his voice carrying across the quiet night. There was no answer. The silence that followed felt oppressive, suffocating. He knocked again, louder this time, his patience thinning with every second that passed. Still nothing. His gut twisted with unease, and he instinctively reached for his radio to call for backup. But before he could, something stopped him. A gut feeling, an instinct, told him that the situation was far worse than it seemed. He circled around to the back of the house, his breath coming in shallow bursts. His eyes darted to the window, and for a moment, he hesitated. Then he stepped closer. The window was slightly ajar, just enough for him to peer inside. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. An elderly woman, pale, motionless, sat slumped in a chair by the fireplace. Her face was ashen, her lips tinged with blue. William's heart skipped a beat. Was she alive? Was she breathing? And then he saw him. Harold Green. He stepped out from the shadows behind the woman, his eyes locking onto Williams through the window. The look on his face was unreadable, cold, distant. But the moment Williams saw what Green was holding, his heart dropped into his stomach. A shotgun. Green's hands gripped the weapon with casual ease, his finger brushing the trigger guard as if it was just another day for him. And as their eyes met through the glass, William felt a shiver race down his spine. It wasn't just a gun. It was a message. A warning. And Harold Green was waiting for him to make his next move. William's breath quickened as the seconds stretched, his chest tight with a palpable sense of dread. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Standing in front of him was Harold Green, the man responsible for the death of his partner, the very man he had been hunting for months. The gun in Green's hand, pointed directly at him, seemed to weigh more than the entire room. It was heavy with the tension of this single moment, the precipice between life and death. William's heart hammered in his chest, his entire body stiffening. Every muscle screamed for him to act, to run, to fight, but he knew better. He had learned that rushing in without thinking only led to disaster. The gun in Green's hand wasn't just a weapon, it was a message. One wrong move, and it could all be over. He had to think, he had to outsmart the man standing before him, or all of this would have been for nothing. His mind flashed back to his training, years of knowing how to stay calm under pressure, how to keep his emotions in check even when everything around him screamed for him to panic. But now, in this suffocating silence, even his training felt insufficient. He couldn't stop the flood of memories rushing through his head, the faces of his colleagues, the faces of the victims, and most of all, the faces of the children that depended on him. He wasn't just fighting for his own life anymore. He was fighting for their survival. Green's eyes were cold, calculating, but there was something else, something darker in them. A glimmer of madness that made William's stomach twist. He didn't know if it was desperation, arrogance, or something more sinister, but he could feel the danger in the air. It was thick, like the calm before a storm. The old wooden house creaked, its very structure seeming to groan under the weight of the tension in the room. William's breath caught as he heard a faint rustling from behind him. He glanced over his shoulder, his peripheral vision catching the faintest movement, just a shadow, but enough to make his heart stop. The children. They were still there, just a few steps away from the back door, frozen in fear. Their wide eyes were full of confusion, a desperation to escape, but a hesitation to trust anyone, least of all him. He could see it in their faces, the raw, unfiltered fear of someone who had seen too much, who had been trapped in this nightmare for far too long. "Stay down," William whispered urgently to them, his voice barely more than a rasp. But the words were hollow, lost in the stillness of the room. He could hear the shallow, rapid breaths of the children behind him, but he dared not look back, not yet. Green was still watching him, his grip tightening on the gun, his lips curling into a cruel smile. The man wasn't afraid. He had nothing left to lose. William's pulse quickened as he realized that any moment now, Green could pull the trigger. He couldn't afford to wait for that moment to come. He had to make a move, now. His eyes darted to the back door, the only way out. He could make it. He could reach the children, grab them, and get out of there before Green had a chance to react. But there was no guarantee. Green would never let them go that easily. In one swift motion, William dropped to the ground, rolling to the side, using the momentary distraction of Green's shifting stance to put distance between them. His breath was ragged as he slid behind the kitchen counter, his mind racing, his muscles tense with anticipation. This was it. He had to move quickly, before Green realized what he was doing. He heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, approaching from the hallway. Green was coming. William could feel the seconds slipping away, his body screaming at him to move faster, but he had to be careful. One wrong move, one sound too loud, and he would be dead. The moment he had been dreading finally arrived. Green stepped into the kitchen, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The gun was still pointed at William, but his focus seemed to waver, his gaze flickering between the open door and the back room where the children were. William's heart hammered as he felt the weight of the decision upon him. He had to act now or never. Without a second thought, he leapt to his feet, rushing toward the children, pushing them out of the line of fire. They gasped in fear, their wide eyes filled with terror. He held them close for a moment, trying to reassure them with a soft touch, but the noise of footsteps behind him shattered that brief moment of calm. "Don't you dare move!" Green shouted, his voice rising with fury. "You think you can just take them from me? You don't know who you're dealing with." William's hand shot to his side, instinctively reaching for his gun, but before he could pull it, a loud bang filled the room. The air seemed to vibrate with the sound of the shot, and time seemed to slow as he felt the heat of the blast rip through the space around him. The children screamed. William threw himself on top of them, shielding them with his body as the air became thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder. His ears rang with the explosion of sound. For a moment, he couldn't hear anything but the pulsing beat of his own heart. His mind was in overdrive, his body moving on instinct as he grabbed the kids, pulling them toward the back door. He had to get them out. He had to make sure they were safe. But Green wasn't finished. The sound of another gunshot rang out, and the world seemed to tilt. A searing pain shot through William's shoulder, but he didn't have time to react. He was already moving, dragging the children with him as fast as he could, the world around him becoming a blur of fear and adrenaline. Every step felt like it was taking him further from safety. He could hear Green's footsteps, slow and deliberate, following them, a predator closing in on its prey. William knew he didn't have much time. "Come on," he muttered through gritted teeth, his voice strained, the pain in his shoulders starting to throb with each movement. "We're getting out of here." With one last surge of energy, he reached the door, flinging it open. They were outside now, the cold night air hitting him like a slap to the face. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He just had to keep running, to get the kids as far away as possible. But the nightmare wasn't over. Not yet. William's breath came in shallow, ragged gasps as he stumbled forward, his legs barely able to carry him any longer. The sharp, relentless pain in his shoulders surged with every movement, a constant reminder of the wound he'd sustained. His grip on the children's hands was ironclad, he couldn't afford to lose them now, not when they had already come so far. The night was thick with darkness, but that only seemed to amplify the urgency of their escape. Every rustle in the trees, every snapping twig beneath their feet, felt like it might be a threat, like something or someone was lurking just beyond the cover of the night, ready to drag them back into the nightmare they had only just begun to flee from. The children, their faces pale and wide-eyed with fear, were barely able to comprehend the full gravity of what had happened, but they trusted him. They had no choice. He was their protector, their only chance. And that responsibility weighed heavily on him, heavier than anything else he'd ever carried. They huddled close to him, as if the simple act of touching him was enough to shield them from the horrors of the world. His heart ached for them. How many lives had they lost in the past few hours alone? How could they possibly heal from this? But there was no time for that now. There was no time for pity, no time for self-doubt. "Keep up," William muttered through gritted teeth, his voice raw, barely more than a whisper. "Stay close, and don't stop moving, no matter what." The children nodded, their steps faltering at first but slowly gaining strength. But the weight of the silence pressed down on them, a silence so deep it almost suffocated. The world around them felt like a cruel parody of normalcy, trees swaying gently in the breeze, the faint rustle of leaves underfoot, but beneath it all was the undercurrent of danger. The constant reminder that the man who had kept them captive was still out there. Harold. William couldn't allow himself to think about him, not right now, not with the children's lives on the line. But even though he fought to push those thoughts aside, they crept into his mind. Harold's voice, cold and unfeeling, taunted him. The way the man's hand had tightened around his throat, the look of satisfaction as he threatened the children. William couldn't shake the memory. Every instinct told him that time was running out. If they didn't get far enough away, if they didn't reach shelter soon, they wouldn't make it. They'd be caught. And that thought, of the children being dragged back, of more suffering, of failure, nearly broke him. His legs screamed in protest with every step, but he kept pushing, moving forward, determined to protect them, to keep them safe, no matter the cost. They couldn't know how badly he was hurting. They needed to see strength in him, not the cracks that threatened to break him wide open. The cold air stung his face as they trudged on, each breath coming more difficult than the last. The trees around them seemed to close in, making the path feel smaller, more claustrophobic. The sound of their footfalls seemed deafening now, echoing in the vast, empty night. They had been walking for what felt like hours, but there was still no sign of safety. Not yet. William's eyes scanned the horizon. They were near the edge of the woods now, close enough that he could make out the outlines of buildings in the distance, a faint glimmer of light from the distant town. But that light seemed so far, so unreachable. In the back of his mind, he calculated the time. How much longer until Harold found them? How much longer before they were forced to fight? Then, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of an engine, distant but growing louder. It was a truck, or a car, something with power. His heart dropped. They had been found. "Run," William hissed urgently, his voice thick with panic. His instincts took over, his mind sending orders to his body to move faster, to push through the pain. The children didn't need to hear more, they were already sprinting ahead of him, their small, fragile bodies moving with an intensity born of fear. They were terrified, and yet, there was something in the way they ran, something that told them they still had hope. They still believed they could escape. But the truck was close. Too close. William forced his legs to move faster, ignoring the burning in his muscles as he pushed himself beyond what he thought was possible. They were almost there, the cabin. It wasn't much, just an old, run-down shack barely standing, but it was the only chance they had. If they could reach it, they could hide. They could regroup, think of a plan. They would survive. He had to make them believe that. The children were already near the door when William arrived, his chest tight with the effort it took to keep moving. He grabbed the handle, nearly breaking it in his haste. With a forceful push, the door creaked open, and they rushed inside, the smell of mold and decay hitting their senses immediately. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. They were out of sight, at least for the moment. The door slammed shut behind them, the old wood groaning in protest as it secured them within its fragile walls. William leaned against it, his breath coming in shallow, erratic gasps as he listened for the sound of footsteps, the truck that had been chasing them. It was still out there. He could feel it. The tension in his body was palpable. "Quiet," William whispered hoarsely, his voice barely audible. The children huddled together in the corner, their eyes wide and full of fear. He moved further into the cabin, his hand hovering over the gun strapped to his waist, but he didn't draw it yet. Not yet. Outside, the truck's engine grew louder, the sound echoing like a death sentence, growing closer and closer until it stopped just outside the cabin. The hairs on the back of William's neck stood on end. The weight of the silence inside the cabin was suffocating. He could feel the children's fear, their desperate need for reassurance, but he had nothing left to give. All he could do was wait, to listen for any sound that would tell him Harold was getting closer. And then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, the voice came. "I know you're in there." William's blood froze. His hand clenched around the gun, his heart hammering in his chest. It was Harold, closer than ever, and he wasn't going to stop until they were all dead. The sound of Harold's voice sliced through the night like a dagger. William froze, his body stiffening in instinctive terror. It was him, Harold, the man who had haunted his every waking thought for the past few months. The man who had destroyed everything he held dear. The thought of the children, who were now huddled, trembling, in the corner of the cabin, filled him with an overwhelming sense of dread. There was no escaping him now. He couldn't let Harold near them. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. William's fingers gripped the gun in his hand, his knuckles turning white, but his thoughts were clouded. The weapon was just a tool, and he knew it wouldn't be enough to stop the monster standing outside. His chest tightened, his heartbeat pounding in his ears, drowning out all other sounds except the rush of adrenaline that surged through him. William's eyes flicked toward the children, their faces pale, their wide eyes filled with unspeakable fear. His stomach twisted into knots. They shouldn't be here. They should have never been pulled into this nightmare. They were innocent. They didn't deserve this terror. His mind raced. What if he failed them? What if Harold broke down the door and took them, too? He wouldn't let that happen. His gaze locked on the window, where Harold stood just beyond the edge of the cabin's dim light, his silhouette looming large and foreboding. William's body tensed as Harold's voice drifted through the thin walls, eerily calm, like he was savoring the moment. "You're cornered, William. There's nowhere left for you to run. It's over. The game's over." The words hit him like a physical blow. He was right, Harold had them trapped. The front and back doors were barricaded, and the windows offered little chance for escape. There was no way out, no way to flee. The only thing left was to fight. William could feel the cold sweat trickling down the back of his neck as he slowly turned to face the children. They were huddled together, their small hands clutching each other for comfort, their faces drawn with the weight of fear. His heart clenched at the sight. He had to protect them. But how? "Stay down," he whispered hoarsely, kneeling beside them. His voice cracked with the strain of keeping his composure. "No matter what happens, you stay down. Do you understand?" The children nodded, their eyes wide with both fear and trust. He could see how terrified they were, but they still trusted him, still believed that he could protect them. He couldn't let them down. He couldn't let Harold win. William moved toward the door, his footsteps slow and measured, his heart pounding so loudly he thought Harold might hear it. The air in the cabin felt thick, suffocating. His breath came in shallow gasps, his entire body coiled, ready for what was coming next. He needed to be strong. For them. He couldn't afford to hesitate. He heard Harold's voice again, cutting through the stillness of the night. "You're weak, just like your father. Always trying to be the hero, always failing." The words sent a jolt of anger through William's veins, but he forced himself to stay focused. The past, his father's mistakes, the guilt, the pain, had no place in this moment. This was about the children, about stopping Harold from taking any more lives. William's grip on the gun tightened, his hands slick with sweat, but his resolve remained unshaken. He wouldn't let history repeat itself. Harold's voice dropped lower, dripping with malicious satisfaction. "You think you can protect them? You think you can stop me?" I've already won. This is just the end of your little fantasy. William's teeth ground together. He couldn't let Harold's words get to him. He couldn't let Harold see any weakness. This was his chance. The time for hesitation was long gone. He had to act. And he had to act now. The cabin was silent for a heartbeat, the tension so thick it was almost unbearable. William reached the door, and as his fingers brushed the handle, the sudden sound of footsteps behind him made him freeze. His heart skipped. The children, no! They were running. His head whipped around, panic flooding through him. He saw the two of them, the children, running towards the back door. His breath hitched in his chest as the realization hit him. They were trying to escape. They were running straight into Harold's arms. No! William shouted, rushing towards them, his feet stumbling over the rough wooden floor. His voice cracked with desperation. Get back inside. It's not safe. But the children were already too far gone, their small feet pounding against the floor as they ran faster than he thought possible. The terror in their eyes drove him forward, each step filled with a mixture of fear and fury. How could they not understand? How could they not see the danger they were in? He reached the door just in time to grab the smaller of the two, pulling her back towards him with a strength he didn't know he had. She gasped, her body trembling as he yanked her into his arms. Stay with me, he whispered urgently, his grip tightening. Stay with me, we're not safe yet. But his eyes were already scanning the yard. The other child, faster, smaller, more agile, was still running. He couldn't get to her in time. He couldn't stop her from running straight into Harold's reach. Don't you dare hurt them. William's voice shook with a mixture of terror and fury. He didn't know how he was going to stop Harold, but he had to. The thought of the children at Harold's mercy was unbearable. They were so young, so innocent. This wasn't their fight. But William knew now, deep in his bones, that he would do whatever it took to protect them, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. The sounds of Harold's footsteps came closer. He was right behind them now, his voice mocking as he taunted, You can't protect them, William. You've never been able to protect anyone. But William wasn't listening anymore. His entire world had narrowed down to a single, unshakable thought, I will protect them. He had no choice but to face Harold, to confront the monster he had become. He couldn't run. He couldn't hide. All that mattered was getting the children to safety. As the investigation unfolds, secrets begin to rise from the shadows. The girls were not just victims of neglect, they were survivors of something far more sinister. And the woman they called Grandma Margaret was holding on to her last breath just to protect them. But one question still echoes, who left them there? And what were they running from? William Carter stepped into their lives by chance, but staying to fight for their safety might cost him more than he ever expected. This story reminds us, sometimes the most dangerous monsters aren't strangers, they're the ones hiding in plain sight. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to follow more emotional true stories and hidden truths the world needs to hear.